In the early Middle Ages, safety rarely lasted. Raids came fast, and the people meant to stop them often stood too far away or held too little power to respond. So protection shifted closer to home. Local nobles needed a place that held out long enough for help to arrive or for attackers to give up. A defensible home stopped being a luxury. It became a survival tool. The first answer looked simple, even crude, but it worked. Builders raised a motte, a man-made mound, then topped it with a wooden tower. Below it they fenced a yard, the bailey, where people, animals, and supplies could be pulled inside at short notice. Earth went up quickly. Timber went up faster. The point was speed, because the next raid never waited for stone. These wooden strongpoints changed the rules of an attack. A raiding party that once swept through open land now faced a steep climb, a narrow approach, and defenders shooting down from above. Fire threatened wood, but reaching the tower still cost time and lives. That delay mattered. It gave villagers somewhere to run, and it gave a lord a base to control the surrounding area. The castle began as an emergency answer, built to buy minutes. Raids still happened, but now the danger also came from nearby lords who wanted land, tolls, and control. A wooden strongpoint no longer felt like enough. Timber burned, doors splintered. Even a simple battering beam could worry an entrance if defenders got tired. So builders changed the main idea of safety. They stopped relying on speed of construction and started betting on something harder to destroy. Stone kept its shape when fire spread, and it absorbed blows that would have chewed through wood. The answer became the keep, a tall, thick-walled stone tower that sat at the centre and dominated the whole defence. It did not make a siege pleasant, but it made it slower. Attackers had to bring heavier tools, more time, and more men, and every day outside raised the cost. That keep changed how people survived. If outer yards fell, defenders did not always lose. They pulled back, shut themselves into the stone core, and forced the attackers to start again. The castle became a system with a final refuge built in. It became a last stand designed in advance. In siege terms, victory shifted away from a quick rush and toward endurance, patience, and the ability to refuse collapse. Larger wars brought larger problems. Small strongpoints no longer held back organized forces that arrived with plans, supplies, and time. So castles spread outward. Builders placed a curtain wall around the heart of the site, then strengthened it with towers at intervals. This changed everything. Defenders no longer waited for the enemy at one final door. They met him earlier, higher, and from multiple angles. Towers did more than look impressive. They broke the wall into fighting positions, so archers covered the base of the stone and the ground beside it. An attacker who reached the wall did not find safety there. He found crossfire. The curtain wall also forced choices. Waste time battering one section or risk scaling under constant shots. Every extra minute outside helped the defenders. But the real trap sat at the entrance. The gatehouse turned the obvious way in into the most dangerous place to stand. Instead of one gate, attackers faced layers, an outer door, a narrow passage, then another barrier behind it. From above, defenders controlled that tunnel with arrows and dropping weapons. Entry itself became a weapon. A would-be breakthrough became a kill zone by design. Sieges did not always end with a dramatic assault. Many simply stretched on day after day, while an army waited outside and a garrison waited inside. And in that kind of fight, the key weapon was time. If attackers controlled the roads, the castle stopped receiving food, firewood, and fresh water. The defenders learned a hard rule. A strong wall meant little if hunger and thirst opened the gate from within. So castles changed from shelters into systems. Builders placed wells inside the walls because a stream outside became useless the moment the enemy arrived. Where deep wells proved impossible, they relied on cisterns built to catch and hold rainwater for weeks or months. At the same time, food storage stopped being an afterthought. Granaries and storehouses became planned features, sized for a garrison, protected from damp and guarded like weapons. Once supplies became part of the design, the whole logic of a siege shifted. A blockade only worked if it outlasted the stockpiles behind the walls. That forced attackers to commit time, men and money for longer than they wanted. Inside, defenders rationed carefully, counted every barrel and treated waste as a threat. Victory depended less on bravery at the battlements and more on planning done months before the first arrow flew. Once walls grew higher and stores grew deeper, attackers adjusted. A quick rush stopped working, so methods became specialized. Ladders went up in coordinated waves aimed at the weakest stretch of wall. When that failed, rams targeted gates, not stone, because wood and iron fittings gave way first. And when neither speed nor force opened a path, men started digging, mining under foundations to make a section collapse. This was not improvisation anymore. It became a craft. Leaders hired men who understood angles, soil and timber supports, and who knew how to keep a ram moving under fire. Early torsion engines appeared, powered by twisted bundles that stored energy, throwing stones to break battlements and exhaust defenders. Each tool had a job. Each job had a team. Siegecraft started to look like a profession, and that changed the balance. Defenders had to answer with their own system. Ditches deepened and widened, so ladders reached less easily and rams struggled to approach. Hoardings extended out from the wall, letting soldiers shoot straight down and drop heavy objects onto men at the base. But the most important countermeasure stayed simple: constant patrols. Mining only worked if it stayed hidden, and vigilance turned the ground itself into a battlefield. By the high medieval period, castle building stopped being rough improvisation and started looking like engineered problem-solving. Miners had learned to tunnel under walls, prop them with timber, then burn the supports and drop whole sections at once. So builders answered underground danger with smarter foundations, harder stone and tighter joints that resisted cracking. Above ground, geometry mattered. Angled faces and well-placed towers reduced blind spots and absorbed missile hits. But the biggest change came from a simple idea. A castle did not need to be one wall with one heart. It could be several castles stacked together. Concentric design put one curtain wall inside another, with open space between them. If attackers broke the outer ring, they did not reach safety or victory. They stepped into a controlled strip where defenders fired from higher inner walls. The gate, once the obvious target, also became a trap built in layers. Gate passages lengthened, doors doubled, portcullises dropped in sequence, cutting an assault into small, trapped groups. Flanking towers covered every step of the approach, and defenders stayed protected while they shot down into the choke point. The result changed the rhythm of a siege. Attackers no longer fought for one breach. They fought for every ring again and again. By the high point of medieval siegecraft, the trebuchet had turned stone into a flying weapon. It did not just throw, it repeated. Crews measured distance, adjusted weight, and aimed at the same section again and again until cracks spread. Bombardment became a method, not a gamble. Walls that once felt permanent started to flinch under routine impact, and every strike carried a second target, the defender's nerve. Attackers pushed this further with discipline. They cleared fields of fire, built stable platforms, and kept multiple engines working in shifts, so pressure never stopped. Stones hit towers, then the joints between wall and tower, then the base where repairs proved hardest. Even when a breach did not open, the noise, dust, and constant damage forced exhausting labour inside. A siege now punished the body and the schedule, not only the battlements. Castles responded by changing shape and behaviour. Walls grew thicker, with more stone behind the outer face, so a hit shattered less deeply. Builders favoured angles and projecting towers that reduced dead ground and let defenders shoot along the wall line. Defence also became more active. Narrow arrow slits, guided arrows and crossbow bolts with safer exposure, while drop openings above gates released stones or boiling liquids onto attackers at the worst moment. Then gunpowder arrived, and the old balance of siege warfare tilted fast. A cannonball did not need patience. It did not need a weak spot, a tunnel, or a lucky collapse. It simply struck again and again in the same place until solid stone started to behave like brittle clay. High walls that once looked unstoppable now offered a clear target. Siege math changed, time shortened, confidence cracked. Defenders learned the lesson the hard way. Height became a liability. A tall curtain wall caught shots and shattered, and the falling rubble helped the attacker as much as the gun did. So builders changed the shape of strength. Walls lowered and thickened. Earth began to matter as much as stone because packed soil absorbed impact instead of splintering. The castle stopped reaching upward and started spreading outward. This new kind of stronghold worked like a shield made for artillery. Broad banks and angled faces reduced the force of a hit and made cracks less deadly. Flat areas appeared where guns could be placed, so defenders answered cannons with cannons. The goal shifted from resisting ladders and rams to controlling firing lines and denying a breach. Castles evolved into fortresses built to survive explosions. As kings and governments gathered power, war changed shape. Orders and taxes came from the centre, and fights were decided by larger campaigns, not by one lord holding one hill. Standing armies moved where the state told them to, and they brought artillery and engineers as standard. In that world, the private castle stopped being a guarantee of safety. Many strongholds still looked intimidating, but they no longer controlled the outcome. The old logic of siege survival weakened. A local garrison might resist for weeks, even months, but a centralized enemy could return again and again, cut supplies wider, and punish rebellion after the walls fell. So rulers started to prefer other tools: field armies, fortified towns, and purpose-built forts that served national borders. The castle's role shifted quietly. Some became administrative centres where officials managed land, courts and records. Defence mattered less than authority. That change left many castles in two new futures. Some were remodelled for comfort and display, because a grand residence now signalled loyalty, lineage and rank more than readiness for assault. Others were simply left behind, too expensive to maintain, too awkward for modern war. Over time, their military features became messages instead of weapons. Later generations treated these places as heritage, not infrastructure. Castles survived, but mainly as symbols of power first and of the past after. Centuries later, the same walls that once meant panic and emergency planning stood quiet. Castles survived, but not as weapons. Many remained as ruins, frozen outlines of choices made under pressure. Where to place a gate, how to protect a well, how to force attackers into narrow spaces. What began as quick answers to fear became places people visited on purpose. The danger disappeared, but the logic stayed. Instead of soldiers testing a perimeter, archaeologists tested the ground. They measured foundations, studied tool marks, and read burned layers like pages of a report. Each find answered a practical question: how long food lasted, where defenders moved, how breaches happened, and which repairs mattered. Reconstructions followed, not to glorify battles, but to check what really worked. A collapsed tower became evidence, not just scenery. Then living history teams turned those results into demonstrations people understood fast. A gatehouse line showed why attackers slowed. A well and storehouse explained why waiting sometimes won. Even simple routines, watch shifts, patrol paths, controlled entry, returned as lessons about survival under siege. The contrast with the first castles felt sharp. Once, building meant staying alive through the next raid. Now the same structure taught how that survival had been engineered.